Welcome to the Avive podcast. I'm your host. My name is JF Benoit. I'm the best-selling author of Addicted to the Monkey Mind and Avive, an adventure in belonging. After 12 years of running a holistic addiction treatment center and decades of helping people who have been challenged with conflicts in their relationships, anxiety, depression, and even addiction, what I saw is that the common denominator of our pain and suffering is based on the lack of true connection with ourselves and with other people. Connection underscores absolutely everything in our lives. Whenever we're experiencing distress, when we're being reactive or experiencing triggers, the root cause is often a disconnection and a break in our ability to experience true belonging. So I bring a wealth of experience and empathy, creating a space where you could feel understood and less alone in your struggles. With connections with guests like you and interviews, I'm going to help you truly and support you to be your true self, to gain the ability to shed all the self-judgments that we have about ourselves, and instead really focusing on the resilient person that you are, on the courageous person that you are, and building this ability to experience yourself as this innate love and value that exists within you. So I'm really glad that you're here. Let's explore this together in another episode of Avive.
Hello, JF.
Hi, Carrie.
How are you doing?
It's a great day.
Good. It's been busy. It's been a busy
Mhm.
one so far. Um,
Mm.
so I was thinking, I know we talked about connection last time, and along with connection, part of the book is correction. So I am wondering, first off, what do you mean by correction? What does that mean?
Mhm. Mm. Well, I think what we've been really exploring with Avive is how to live relationally. So, and that we don't understand that living in relationship and focusing on connection means that we have to prioritize the experience. So, meaning the experience I'm having and the experience that you're having, that's
Mhm.
connection because we are feeling creatures, right?
Mm.
So, in the book, what I present the idea that we were raised in a correction way. So when we think at the beginning, the corrections early on are about survival. Don't put your finger in the electrical outlet. Don't
Yeah.
put your hand on the stove, and that helps us survive. But then slowly they become more about our character and about fitting into society, right? So
Mhm.
you're not going to wear that to school, or the comments keep coming, but they're about conforming to society's
Or
way
your
because,
family.
right, or your
Yeah.
family,
Yeah.
right? And so what happens is we start attaching sort of who we are based more on our behaviors. So we start thinking, and it doesn't happen like we don't do this logically. We don't, go through that process, linear in a way that makes sense. It just happens. And
Mhm.
so then we adopt this correction way of functioning with ourselves and with other people, and we abandon the connection, which happens more on an emotional level, which is, the way we were treated when we were growing up. When you came back from school and let's say you did something wrong at school, the the parents are focused on solving the problem, on solving the issue that's happening for the child, which is a good thing. But at the same time, what's being ignored is how the child feels.
Mhm.
And it's problematic because the child is filled with stress or anxiety or emotions that is not being addressed, is not being treated as an important aspect of their lives. It's like the importance is on doing it right,
Mhm.
but how I feel kind of like takes a back seat.
Yeah, but okay, so I totally see what you're saying, and I feel like there's like my background was more you do what I say when I say it, and
Mhm.
like get over it, that kind of thing. And then you have um, the approach you're talking about. But how does that work in a child? Let's say a child that's did something that, like, does that mean there's no consequences? Like, how does that make them like going forward? How does it change the behavior or um, help them get on a better track if
You
there's
see,
no consequence or
it's amazing how ingrained it is in our psyche, because
yeah,
even the question itself believes,
yeah,
there's a belief in your question, and
right,
the belief is that if I it's almost like insane to name it,
yeah,
but the belief is if I actually attune and connect, that
yeah,
means that um, the problem won't get resolved, the situation won't, because then it's the equivalent of giving my child a free pass,
right.
which
Well, so
is,
there's a lot of discussions these days on raising kids and what the correct way to do it, because a lot of people, like in my generation, what am I? I'm Gen X, right? So um, we had a certain kind of parenting, and then there's a different kind of parenting, and then people are having arguments online. Yeah, but that kind of parenting, when they're not taking any accountability, like, no kids take accountability, these, there's just this whole big discussion about if just tuning into their emotions is making a difference in how they are able to tackle life. Do you know what I mean?
well, the proof is in the pudding. Most people that are stuck with that belief, right? That it's like
Yeah,
I can't just attune to my child and take care of their emotions, because then the
yeah.
behavior is going to continue, right?
Right,
But you
right.
don't know that to be true until you do it.
Yeah,
And here's what I find is that there is, anytime there's distress, okay, in the nervous system, it's like there's a disturbance in the force, right? And
yeah,
so it's like the person is not operating in a healthy way.
right.
And that's the real problem. It's not their behavior. Their behavior is a result of that, distress that they're experiencing. So
Yeah,
we don't realize that if we actually go to the source of the problem, which is
yeah,
an emotional experience that they're having, and we're able to help them really experience safety, a
yeah,
sense that even though they did something wrong, they're still okay. We still love them, right? We
yeah.
still, we're not going to toss them on the street, right? It's like, but the nervous system doesn't know that. And so when we keep focusing on correcting, the nervous system only hears, you see, you did it wrong. You're not okay. And
Mhm.
if you want to be okay, the only way is through that behavior. But then that keeps sort of perpetuating a sense that, oh, so the only way to be accepted is if I do what I'm told, or I behave in a particular way, and then I belong. It's
Yeah,
like it's a message that goes against the grain of human nature. Human nature is like, hey, of course I love you. You can make mistakes, but you're not your mistakes,
right,
right?
right.
And of course, there are extreme example. There's certain behaviors that I think oftentimes people haven't watched it. If it's escalating where you have a kid that's taking a rock and throwing it the window at school, that's a different
Right.
behavior. Now we're talking about, but how did the kid get there?
Yeah,
Right. And I want to suggest that the kid got there because he didn't get attuned to. So now resolving that is a little more complex, because now you have a very troubled kid whose
yeah,
emotional system and his ability to feel safe emotionally is completely gone. So
yeah,
there's more work to do at that stage.
yeah. And it is. It is like, an interesting dynamic when you are raising kids. My daughter's 14, and I was raised in a certain way, and then I am really doing my best to raise her in a different way than what I was, but when you don't have that previous example of how to do it in the correct way. It's always a, am I being too lenient on this or too soft, or am I, like you go back and forth in your head. And I was thinking about it before. I was thinking, okay, I'm looking at how I was raised with the correction, definitely the correction mindset, and then how I'm raising my daughter. And I'm like, okay, so what is the difference that I see between what I was like maybe at that age and what she's like? And one thing that I thought of is that I was very tuned in to what other people were feeling, or what was their emotions, what was their reactions. And I wasn't very tuned into what I was thinking or what
Right.
I was feeling. And
Mhm.
and my daughter is excellent about what she is thinking and what she is feeling. Like, she
Mhm.
can express it really well, and she is aware of it. I don't even think I would have had the words to be able to explain what I was feeling, because that just wasn't part of the problem. Like, I mean, that wasn't part of the equation, you know?
Well, that's an indication too of how you've actually, that's a sign that you've actually created a secure environment for her, that she doesn't feel threatened to say, because to say what she feels, because
Yeah,
you just told us that you were raised with a father, right? That was saying you do as you're told. That's not a
yeah,
secure, emotional environment. That's an environment where
right.
you better watch out what you say, right? And you better be careful about how you say it.
And it was an environment that if I did not do what, I wouldn't have been included in. Like, that wasn't a real option. You were excluded if you did not do
Mhm.
those things.
Right.
So
So
that is
even worse,
survival. Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So if we flesh this out a little bit more, let's take an example. Let's say you have a mother and she's with a teenage daughter and she has to take her to the dentist for a cleaning, something
yeah,
simple.
yeah,
And the daughter is just throwing a fit and doesn't want to go. Okay?
yeah.
So in that moment, how do you focus on connection?
I would sit down and say, "Okay, why are you having these feelings? What's going on for you to feel like
Okay?
that?" Like,
Okay, so notice that
think get your
naturally,
ass
right?
in the car. No, I'm kidding. You feel that on the way up to the dentist. You got 20 minutes and that's it. No. See, I'm at war sometimes with how to approach things.
But you see, you had the connection there, and then you had your father right there in your head.
Yeah, I have to war with myself sometimes.
Well, I think it's actually very real. I think that's what we all experience. It's just this battle of like, ah! So there's a
Yeah,
there's a huge part that wants to be reactive, and it's just
yeah,
like, no, you're going to get in the car, and we're going to do this, and
yeah.
So what attunement and connection requires is that it's not just attuning to the daughter, it's actually attuning to our own emotional body.
Mhm.
And if we don't take the time to do that, then it becomes almost impossible to be attuned to someone else's experience because we're disconnecting from our own. So
Yeah,
if we're operating from a disconnection emotional body, then we're just going to use this reactive way of operating, right? And we're going to start saying, like, you better get in the car. And if you don't get in the
yeah,
car, right, your father's going to hear about it, whatever, all of this
yeah,
dynamic that we get into. So, how do we attune to ourselves? Well, we have to pause that moment where we feel this irritation. We're just like, oh, I just don't want that, right? I want her to get in the car, right? And if we
yeah,
take a breath and we just attune to a deeper fear, and the fear, this is what's bizarre, is that the initial emotions are related to the thought of my daughter is being disobedient. She's not following my instruction. And we think that that's why we're irritated. Okay.
Yeah.
So as long as we follow that narrative that's saying she's not conforming, she needs to follow my instruction and she's not, and that's the problem, then we're reacting from those thoughts and we get angry and frustrated. And there's no way out of that. It creates the same result of disconnection. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we can learn is there's a deeper truth there at play, and that there's an anxiety that exists in our nervous system when we're about to react like that. And that anxiety has nothing to do with the situation itself or the daughter's behavior. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine if when we start going deeper into the emotional body, what we discover is if you were to ask yourself without thinking about it, like, what am I afraid of? Like,
Mm-hmm.
really? What am I
Mm-hmm.
scared of? Right. And then immediately the answers will pop. And there'll be things like, well, you're going to have to reschedule with your boss again. And I don't know how that's going to go because you took the time off to take her
Oh,
now. And you know what? The dentist's been booked for months. So now it's like we might have to wait another. And so you start feeling all this energy of all these different things. And when you keep just feeling the discomfort of that, like, okay, so you're out of control. You're not in charge now in this moment, it appears, right? And
yeah.
so why is that so scary? And ultimately you get to this place of, oh, if all this happens that way, then I must not be a good parent, right? I must not be a good person if I can't even get my daughter to take care of her teeth.
And how
You see
is
what I
your
mean?
daughter going to succeed in life if she can't, you know,
Right,
override this? And so there's that
right.
fear of this is not gonna how is this
And
gonna work? She's not gonna turn out. You know? And then when you really look at it, you're like, "That's not true."
And it's like, but you know what you're describing there is so true. It's like, and
Yeah,
none of this is logical. It's not like
no,
it doesn't live in the mind, it lives in the belly. There's this feeling of
yeah,
this that we're actually putting ourselves in question in that moment. And that's what makes us feel extreme distress. It's not the situation. And so when we reach that place where we're going, oh, so I'm questioning myself.
mhm,
Oh, and then we can just go, well, wait a second. Whether my daughter goes to this dentist appointment or not, does that define me? Is that how we decide if I'm okay or if I'm doing a good job? And then we
mhm,
can kind of feel, right, the absurdity of how we just keep pinning ourselves down with this anxiety by defining ourselves by all these situations. At the nervous system level, that's what we've been trained to do, you
um,
know?
I find it interesting when you say your behavior doesn't define who you are, because if your behavior doesn't define who you are, if how you conduct yourself in this world doesn't define who you are, then what does?
Well, and it can be tricky territory to understand this one because our behaviors have impacts in the world.
Right.
If you don't stop at the stop sign, okay,
Yeah.
there's an impact and there's danger, and you might be putting other people at risk, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about uh, like reasonable behaviors and behaviors that are not acceptable, right? This is discernment. Like, so we all have discernment. So we do stop at the stop sign because we have discernment, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is when we make mistakes or when other people around us make mistakes or their behavior was not the best one, right?
Right.
So if I lose my temper with my partner, that's a behavior, right?
Yeah.
So now at the nervous system level, what we have a tendency to do is to think that because I lost my temper with my partner, that means that I'm not an okay person now.
Okay.
And if I accumulate those moments, and if I've lost my temper again, right, next week or the following weekend, and I've done it a dozen times, then I keep using that behavior as ammunition for, you see, you're not okay and you'll never be okay. Or it
Okay.
could be something like you loan money to somebody and then you find out that they had no intention of paying you back, or and you start thinking, you see, you're not a smart person. You're not. So all these mistakes that we make along the way, which are natural to living, to being human, right?
Yeah.
We use them to define ourselves, and we attacked our own nervous system with all of these little things that pile up, and we don't realize that we're sort of really, really strongly conditioned to do that. And
So
it's
we're making a
exhausting.
case, we're making a case against ourselves.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we
Yeah.
are. And
Yeah.
we're denying, you see, if I made a mistake and lost my temper, can that erase all the times that I was extremely loving with my partner? Are those time completely gone?
Mhm. No.
It's not possible, right? When you look at it, in a straightforward fashion like this, you realize, yeah, that makes sense. It's like, yeah, I was really loving. I thought about my partner. I made a beautiful meal, and then I acknowledged how hard they were working. And so all these things were also other behaviors that I've done, right? So, but it's like who we are, as in, for me, it's like this is what we really discovered in Avive La Vie, right? This adventure and belonging is rediscovering that our sense of love and value is innate. It lives in us. Our resilience and courage, these are intrinsic inside of ourselves. They're not. It's okay that we make mistakes. It's okay that we navigate our lives in different way. We do the best we can according to the beliefs we hold in every moment. And yet, the essence of who we are as a loving and valuable person, that does not fluctuate. It only fluctuates in our minds, you know?
Right. So the behavior is not the whole picture. So you're not saying that certain behaviors are just, it doesn't have anything to do with who you are. It's just that adding them up in the whole picture of things, that those few behaviors don't make it, that's not you. That's not the
Right.
essence
And
of what.
not to be confused with accountability, like you were mentioning
Right.
it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Discernment is taking responsibility for my action. Yes. So
Yeah.
that's even more being yourself, which is able to admit the mistakes that I've made. That's an
Yeah.
important part of being a loving and a valuable person. It's like, yes, of course, I can admit, but I don't define myself by those mistakes, right? Someone
Yeah.
who has no capacity for accountability, I would say they are completely disconnected from themselves. Usually, those people have
Yeah.
no ability to feel. They just,
Yeah.
that's what a narcissist is somebody
Yeah.
who's just, they don't feel very much, and they just keep doing what they're doing for their own interest, and they completely disregard the impact of what happens to others.
I think
So,
it's
but
one way for them to feel a little bit like they appreciate having some kind of a reaction that's different from their normal life, just because I feel like they're trying to get
you're
themselves to
absolutely
feel something.
You're absolutely right. And it's kind of like they trigger everybody along the way.
Yeah, yeah,
and, and that
and are
trigger gets
amused.
right. And they feed on that. You're right. Because emotionally they can't feel. So it's like I guess it's a dysfunctional way of having your own feelings through other people,
Yeah, 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 for sure. It's kind of like we've talked about how alcohol, can be a medicine to the people. It's not the right medicine to take to try to quell those, but for them, that's kind of like their medicine that they're trying to take to get to feel
yeah.
something, and it's not the right one. And be on the receiving end of it. Not the right one to use. Try something else. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's a so for somebody who say they've raised their kids, they're already in their teens at this point, and they have different things that they're working with their kids, and or even if they're into adulthoods and they're working with correction versus connection. So how does someone start that if they haven't been doing it in the past and they've been
Mhm.
doing the correction? How do you switch over to
Mm.
doing connection instead of correction? when
It's
the child's not really used to that. So there might be some
right.
distrust of being safe to open up.
That will happen, and it's important to understand, to anticipate that, even not just with your children, but with your partner, or even when you begin to shift, even with the people in your
Friend.
life, the colleagues at work, your friends, because they're not used to somebody uh, focusing on the connection, right? And it can be uncomfortable, both for not just the person who's trying to make that change, but for the other person too, right?
Yeah.
The thing is that at some point, when you do it once, this is what I often just say to people and say, we don't really have an understanding of what will happen when we become vulnerable and when we actually tell a deeper truth that is actually going on, right? So I'll give you the example. If we come back to the example of the daughter not wanting to go to the dentist, can you imagine pausing, taking a breath, touching the pain initially, like, oh yeah, all this stuff, and then you're frustrated about the daughter. You see that, like I talk in the book, you walk through the 3 doors, right? So the first door is to pausing this narrative that's going to lead to disconnection. Then the second one is to attune. Now what I'm doing is I'm descending and I start realizing all the fears that I have. The fear of my boss's reaction, the fear that the dentist won't reschedule, all of these things are happening. And now I feel the deeper fear that somehow I'm not okay, right? That somehow if my daughter doesn't go, and I breathe through all that, and now I'm experiencing calmness. This is the part that we're not familiar with because we haven't really known that even going through that discomfort, which initially just seems like it's pointless to do that. But in reality, it's the very thing that soothes the nervous system, is to give it attention and say, hi, I'm right here with you, and you're scared. And you're scared that you're not enough. And I'm going to sit with you in a moment and breathe through this. When you do, then this calmness happens. And this is the place where we can now touch the truth and our vulnerability. So imagine saying to your daughter at that point, I'm noticing I got really scared. Like,
Mhm.
you're not wanting to go to the dentist. And I was terrified that somehow I'm not enough. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm afraid what might happen with my boss. And I don't know when the next time you're going to get in a dentist. And I start realizing that I was just, gosh, I really want to be a good mother or a good father. And I really care about you. And I just got really scared there for a moment. So
Yeah.
now, what do we even feel it as I say it? Like, I can feel my nervous system completely calming down now. And I guarantee you, it's like I've been guiding so many people and clients and all these uh, Avive La Vie adventure weekends that we do. And what I see is that the other person relaxes too. Because now it's like they're going, the daughter had no idea this was going on, but there's no blame. There's no more pressure. The discussion shift from going to the dentist to, oh, I'm having an experience here. Let me tell you what it is. And it's
Yeah.
vulnerable, but it's beautiful. And
Yeah.
what I can tell you is that the kid will just open up in that moment in some fashion or another. They'll go, their heart will just, they won't be able to keep
Yeah.
the fight, and
Yeah.
if you're with someone that insists on pushing back still in that moment,
Mhm.
what I found is if you don't if you don't get hooked and you actually stay with the experience and saying, yeah, it's like, I hear you're frustrated too, and you're going through your experience. And it's like, and I'm just realizing that I'm an awesome parent. You know what? I really am. And it's just, I just needed to reaffirm that. And so by putting the focus on I'm going to stay connected with who I am, the other person starts shifting from the topic as well and feeling more close and connected, right? Because that's where the focus is going. So what
Mhm.
does it take to do this? Initially, it's just pure courage. It
Mhm.
just simply, we have to be brave and not go with the narrative that wants to defend itself or wants to argue. But
Yeah.
even I remember at the beginning where when I really first started doing this, I was I was not only scared, but I was noticing that as I was speaking, I would have the tendency to think that somehow I'm going to get attacked, like I'm going to, because that's so much the belief about being vulnerable is that it's not acceptable, it's not welcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's understandable. And I'm not saying that everybody's going to receive you and everybody's going to be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
but the truth is what matters is that I feel better when I do it.
Mhm.
Regardless of how the person takes it, I'm now calm. I'm in a different space. I can handle the situation completely differently. I'm not
Yeah.
reactive anymore. And I
Mhm.
feel closer to the person, whether they're allowing me to feel that connection with them, whether they're there or not. It's not as important.
Yeah. I had to learn that because I feel like in my youth, partially because of my, family dynamics, I didn't really feel free to express myself or to talk about certain things, and having those different emotions that you're talking about, and then realizing once I did start talking about it and once I, um, did start sharing it, that it really enabled whoever I was talking with to share what they were thinking too, because they might not have just come up and started to talk about it, but then when I started saying that, and almost everybody had some kind of a something happen with them that would could correspond emotionally to what you, and so it really um, made it so I went from I tend to be an observer and really watching how people react and do, but I didn't feel as much being involved in stuff until I started really talking and sharing with people. And then of course, if you don't do that, then it's harder to have a closeness with people if they don't even know what you're what is going on in the inside. And I think that a lot of people don't want to share what they're going through because somehow they think that, oh, I don't want, people to have to worry about it, or they don't, want them to have to think about it. And um, I just feel like I missed out when I was younger on a lot of opportunities to connect with people because of those different types of
It,
fear,
it,
and framing
yeah,
it in a certain way in my head, like, "Oh, this is gonna be a burden on somebody," this is gonna be when that's not, that really is giving somebody the opportunity to respond back with whatever they're working with.
right. And there's a huge difference between just laying out all the dirty laundry and acting like you're hopeless or you're a victim of other people in
Right.
situation. That's not
Yeah.
connection, right? That's not vulnerability, right?
No.
So just like reacting emotionally with anger and stuff, that's not vulnerability either, right?
Yeah.
What we're talking about is a complete different way of being emotionally. And it's an attunement and an honest feeling, like notice that as I was, role playing the parent and I'm saying, I got scared that I wasn't enough right now and I want to be the best parent I can be. Now
Yeah.
notice there's no blame in that. It's just a deeper truth of this fear that exists. And now it's like I'm fully connected to myself when I say that, because now I've reached the deep truth that lives in my belly. And now there's no reason my mind calms down because there's no other thing to be freaked out about. There's no other reason. Even the dentist appointment looks like a ridiculous thing now at this point, right?
Mhm.
So we haven't had enough practice with vulnerability and with like really touching the deeper fear that we're experiencing and sharing it to
Mhm.
really know what actually happens in our lives when we do that. We imagine the worst because most people have a fear and judgment of emotions because of how people have reacted with their emotions. They haven't been really honest underneath those emotions. And so nobody wants reactive people or reactive relationship. That's understandable. But
Yeah.
vulnerability and authenticity is not based on being reactive. It's
No.
not, they're not the same emotions, and they're tender emotions. They're, they're emotions that are related to my sense of love and my sense of value. And it's about an honesty and a transparency. And wow, I mean, the magic that I see has happened in my life from
Hmm.
doing this and that I see in people, it's palpable.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like eliminating hours and years of conflict, like
Yeah.
like
So excuse me, in what ways does having that correction mindset as you were growing up, even though people are adults now, they could be 20 to 70, whatever, 80. Um, how is that manifest in people's lives in how they currently operate?
I think in the book I talk about how they are 6 false belonging habits that we have really, for lack of a better term here, we've had no choice. Okay. So the way we were raised created these ways of operating, thinking that in order to belong, in order to be part of my family, of the group, I needed to behave this way, right? So
Yeah.
these false belonging habits are ingrained in us, and they're what they have in common is they're corrective, but they're not corrective in the same way. And some of them might be even the opposite, right? So if you look at, for example, and it's, in the book, what's really great that I'm hearing so many people are excited about is that it demonstrates each false belonging habit through a character, right? And
Yeah.
so it comes alive. Like you get a sense of like, oh yeah, that's what I do, right?
Yeah.
That's how I
Yeah.
function, right?
When
Okay,
I kind
so
of want to, in the future podcasts, I kind of want to take each one. So,
yeah, that
yeah.
would be
So,
good to do, to
okay. And
describe
so,
them and understand them.
and,
So,
and
so the
those
cor-
are the manifestations,
Yeah.
basically.
So right. So the correction is, so I'll give an example of two that are opposites. Okay. So one is performance, right? So Kenta is raised by a father who, for him, he wants to pass on, right, his legacy of his architect firm and all of this stuff. And it's just like, so the kid learns through all the feedback he gets from his dad that what matters most in order to be part of receiving love from his father is to succeed at all costs.
Yeah.
So whatever he does becomes performance based. So in his mind, he's correcting himself in terms of if he doesn't succeed at something or if he fails at something, or he's constantly on the lookout for, you got to be the best and you got to deliver, and this is how it is. And so his mind is working overtime to do that,
Yeah.
but connection takes the back seat when he's doing that, right?
Yeah.
So an opposite of that is Amani, who's actually raised by a mother who's very, very sick, and at an early age there's no one there taking responsibility for even her siblings, or the mother needs help, and she grows up too fast, and so she ends up serving everybody in the family
Yeah.
and all that. So
Yeah.
her correction is, don't think too much of yourself. Like, don't
Okay.
focus on you, because that's not how life is. And it's actually dangerous if you focus on you, because at that time of growing up, there'll be nobody there for you anyway. So,
Mhm.
and so the correction is constantly be there for others, constantly be there. And so what
Yeah.
that does is leaves no room for her, and for her to receive, and for her to be cared for. And so she struggles with that. So you see,
Mhm.
those are different kinds of correction, but the basis of the correction is that you can't be yourself.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
have to somehow conform, distort yourself to some behavior that will promise you that then you will belong, which it serves us because our environment responded with positive, like, yeah, you do belong when you behave this way. The problem
Yeah.
is that it never lasts. It's always temporary. It's really short lived, and then you
Yeah.
start again, right? If Kenta succeeds at something, he has this feeling, oh, he belongs now. But then the next day, it's the new project he's working on, and then they just start all over again, right?
And it's hard
Amani is the
because
same way.
there's good things about both of those things. Like Amani, I was like, "Oh yeah, I did that." That's neglecting myself, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but and so there's like the hooked on performance with Kenta, like i- the balance seems like it's really important. So that's so overshadowed his life that, but at the same time, it's good to do a good job at what you do, and to do the best that you can. And then with Amani, it's good to care for others. Like and just not think of yourself all the time. That's a good, but then when it so overshadows and it's so unbalanced, and that's the hard thing for people. And I really liked that in the book too, that you could see um, kind of a way out of it because there's there's always the good parts to it too. So you're trying to balance. It's not like I'm never going to do anything for anybody else again. That's not like how you want to operate. But so yeah, I appreciated that it kind of gave concrete examples of kind of what that means. And
Yeah.
it is kind of
Well,
an awareness too, the
yeah.
awareness that you need.
Well, our greatest gift about who we are actually comes out of our wounds. So, meaning that, right, the great achiever is a very creative, innovative person. It's somebody who's like constantly creating and wants to impress others, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like you said, being an achiever, there's nothing wrong with that. The issue is when we actually build our identity based on our achievements, right? Or
yeah.
just the same with Amani, basing her identity on a person that gives. So that means that if you stop giving, then you no longer belong. Just in the moment that you stop giving. And it's
And when
just
you're
like,
ignoring your inner voice to do those things,
right.
like
And
that's
it's
that
like,
living a life
yeah,
of quiet desperation.
right. In
Always,
a way, yeah. Because it's kind of
yeah,
like what gives me value is my behavior. And it can never do that, right? Like
yeah.
if Amani or the person that is so giving, that serves everybody all the time, can you tell me in your right mind that if they stop giving, does that mean that they're not lovable anymore?
No,
It makes no sense. If the person fails at something, does that mean they're not lovable anymore? Of course
mm,
not. But
yeah,
yet none of that is logical. It's been wired in us, in our cells, in our emotional body, and we keep following this way of behaving because we don't we haven't learned to attune to this emotional body that needs to have a different experience. So the emotional body needs to have an experience that when I fail, I'm still fine. I'm still me. I
hmm
mean, I remember going through this certification process where I sat in front of a panel of 7 leaders in this organization, right? And it was insane where at one point after they drill me with questions for like 45 minutes, they give you the choice to stay in the room or leave. And
yeah,
in that moment, they say, we're going to talk with each other and talk about what feedback we would give you, right?
mm,
On based on this interview of what kind of a leader you are and all of that. So they start talking, right? And all I hear, the majority of what I hear, of course, because it's feedback, it's about focusing on what they see about me that needs to improve or it needs to.
yeah,
Well, by the time I got out of that room, I was fuming with anger and I was
yeah,
thinking they're showing me that I don't add up, right?
yeah,
That's what they're telling
yeah,
me, right? But
yeah,
then later on, a few days later, that's when we actually find out about our certification, if we got certified or not. And I walk back into the room and there's these 7 leaders there and they're all standing up with a big smile on their face. And I was like, no. And they're all like going, yeah, like you got certified. And I was thinking, I've worked for 20 years of my life, right, towards this
yeah,
certification. And I thought you were telling me that I didn't add up. But for the first time, these were men that wanted to see everything about me. They wanted to see the mistakes I made. They wanted to see how I respond to those mistakes. They wanted to see that I'm not perfect. They wanted to see my qualities of leadership. They wanted to see all of me. And they wanted to know that I could actually be transparent with all of me, my
Yeah.
flaws, my great qualities, right? And it was the first time that I believe my nervous system received the message, like truly, you are not your behavior. You, of course, you don't add up in so many ways. And of course, you're amazing in so many different ways. And the truth is, you're still the man you are. You're still the leader that you are. And it
Mhm.
was, yeah, I mean, and I don't think we have enough of those experiences in our lives. We just don't. So, how
Yeah.
would we know to do it when we don't have them? They're not modeled either, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
When you go to a job interview, what do people do? They present all of their best, whatever. But you know what? 3 months later, your coworkers and your boss is going to know you, and you'll know them too, right? And it's just like, so why are we presenting all these facade and all these things when in reality, it's not it's not conducive to being healthy, to live that way. It's
Yeah.
exhausting,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well, that's I appreciate that. I felt like we had a really good conversation last week about connection, and then I feel like kind of fleshing out more of the correction kind of opens up the door for exploring the different false belonging habits. Like if we can start next week on chapter 1 or chapter 2, Kenta, uh, hooked on performance, and kind of talk about that. I think that will be nice to go through each one and just
Yeah.
kind of get into them more.
Yeah, and I think I want to leave the listener today with a thought about begin to think in terms of connection. And what that means is as simple as deciding I wake up every day now and I think connection. What does that mean? It just means that I want to have an experience of connection. Even if you don't know how, okay? It's sending a message like you want your brain to start thinking the connection is more important than the agenda of what I'm trying to do. I mean, there's the classic saying, right? That says it's the journey that matters, not the end result. Life is not a means to an end, right? But our brain that is functioning from correction is looking for that means to an end. And so we're dominating by this way of thinking. So I want to
Yeah.
invite everyone to think, begin to think differently, start thinking about how the connection is important. And that what that means is your experience that you're having matters and the experience of other people matters. And when we start focusing on those experiences and giving it attention and giving it love and approaching that with softness, not with judgments, we
Mhm.
already are on the right track. Already like right there, we're going to respond differently, right? So there's much more we can learn, but that would be a good first step. It's just focus on connection. Write it on a post-it note and put it on your bathroom mirror, like
Yeah. I just put it on my list. I wrote it
put it on
down.
the refrigerator, go print a magnet that says
Yeah.
connection. You
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah. That's
Thanks,
true.
Gary.
Well, very good. Thanks. See you next time.